In the next 15 minutes or so, you will understand why what you're experiencing is not breakdown. Not because nothing has collapsed, but because collapse is precisely what this phase requires. You'll see how Carl Jung named this condition with greater precision than any clinical framework has managed since. You'll encounter Teresa of Ávila's map of the interior life, a map so exact that it describes your current coordinates with uncountable accuracy. And you'll understand why the Nigredo is not a crisis to survive, it is an initiation to complete. But first, the wrong premise. The assumption that something has gone wrong. That the silence after the breakthrough is a symptom of failure rather than the signature of process working exactly as it should. That assumption is the only thing making this unbearable. Before we dive in, if this kind of content resonates with you, come find me at luminaryflow.com. There's a free gift waiting for you. You'll find the link in the top comment below. Now let's get back into it. You've had the experience, a moment of clarity so total, so undeniable, that something in you was permanently rearranged. The ceiling lifted. For a period, however brief, you were somewhere else, somewhere more real. And then it ended. Not with a dramatic collapse, not with a visible crisis, with a quiet, persistent withdrawal. The practice that once opened something now produces only silence. The insights that arrived effortlessly have stopped arriving. The presence you touched, the one that felt like your most essential self, is no longer accessible by any method you previously used to reach it. Modern psychology has names for this: depression, burnout, spiritual emergency, derealization. Modern psychology is looking at the wrong object. What it is measuring is the symptom. What it is missing is the process. And the difference between these two things is the difference between pathology and initiation. The alchemists understood this. Teresa of Ávila understood this. Carl Jung spent the better part of 30 years understanding this. The problem is not the silence. The problem is the framework through which you are hearing it. In 1577, in a small cell in Ávila, Spain, a Carmelite nun named Teresa wrote what is arguably the most precise map of the interior life ever produced in the Western tradition. She called it the interior castle. She described the soul as a castle of 7 rooms, 7 mansions, arranged in concentric rings around a central chamber. The journey of spiritual development is a journey inward through each mansion toward the center. Most people who encounter Teresa stop at the outer mansions. The practices, the consolations, the preliminary experiences of prayer and contemplation. These are the entrance halls. They are not the destination. Teresa was explicit about what happens in the later mansions. The closer the soul moves toward the center, the more severe the stripping becomes. The consolations disappear. The felt sense of the sacred withdraws. The practices that once produced reliable results produce nothing. She called this the dark night of the spirit, and she distinguished it carefully from an earlier phase, the dark night of the senses, which many seekers mistake for the same experience. The dark night of the senses is the loss of pleasure in worldly things, disorienting, uncomfortable, but preliminary. The dark night of the spirit is something else entirely. It is the withdrawal of spiritual consolation itself. The interior experiences, the certainties, the direct sense of contact with something larger, all of it goes silent. And in its place, a dryness so complete that even the desire for the sacred seems to have dried up. Teresa did not describe this as a problem. She described it as a doorway. Imagine entering a room with no visible light source. You reach for your phone, no signal. You reach for a torch, it doesn't work. The darkness doesn't mean there is nothing in the room. It means your instruments of detection have been removed. Because what is in the room cannot be found by those instruments. It can only be inhabited. Carl Jung read Teresa. He also read the alchemists, the medieval and Renaissance practitioners who encoded their accounts of the interior process in the language of metallurgical transformation. And what he found beneath the symbolic language was a phenomenological description that mapped precisely onto what Teresa called the dark night. The alchemist called it the Nigredo, the blackening, the first and most dangerous phase of the great work. In alchemical theory, the prima materia, the raw, undifferentiated substance that would eventually become gold, had first to be reduced to its most fundamental state, not refined, not improved, dissolved. The blackening was the process by which every fixed structure in the substance was broken down, every false compound separated, every pretense to stability exposed and eliminated. Strip away the symbolic language, and what remains? Discrimination at the most fundamental level. The material being sorted at its deepest layer in preparation for a recombination that could not have occurred without first passing through complete dissolution. Consider what neuroscience has documented in parallel. Research by neuroscientist Robin Carhart-Harris and his team at Imperial College London on deep contemplative and psychedelic states consistently shows a specific mechanism: the default node network. The brain's primary self-referential system, the neural architecture of the habitual ego, becomes temporarily suppressed. What subjects describe during this suppression is precisely the phenomenology the alchemists named: a dissolution of fixed structure, a period of formlessness, followed in successful integration by a reorganization at a higher order of coherence. This isn't mystical speculation. It is documented in both the alchemical literature and in contemporary neuroscience. The disagreement is only about what precisely is being dissolved. The Nigredo is not pathology. It is the necessary precondition for the work that follows. Here is what modern spiritual culture consistently fails to account for. The dark night doesn't precede awakening, it follows it. The sequence is not suffering, then breakthrough, then peace. The actual sequence, the one documented by Teresa, by John of the Cross, by Jung, by every serious cartographer of the interior process, is breakthrough, then consolidation, then dissolution, then the dark night, then something that cannot be named in advance. Think about what happens structurally after a genuine spiritual breakthrough. A previously unconscious content has been brought into awareness. The boundary between the conscious self and the deeper layers of the psyche have been temporarily breached. Something real has been seen. But seeing something is not the same as integrating it. The gap between recognition and embodiment is precisely where the Nigredo begins. The old structure has registered the new information. It cannot continue operating as though it hasn't, but it does not yet know how to reorganize around what it has seen. And in that interval, in that structural incompatibility between what was known and what has been glimpsed, the dissolution begins. Jung called this the most dangerous phase, not because it's painful. He called it the most dangerous phase because it is the point at which the seeker is most likely to interrupt the process, to reach for medication, for distraction, for a teacher who will reassure them that nothing fundamental is being dismantled, that they simply need to adjust their practice. This interruption, what the alchemists call the opus interruptus, does not end the process, it suspends it. The prima materia remains half dissolved, the work remains incomplete. What was it that broke open in the breakthrough? The answer to that question determines what must be relinquished before this phase completes. What does the Nigredo actually feel like from the inside? Not dramatic. This is important. The popular image of the dark night, drawn from its most extreme literary accounts, suggests a spectacular interior catastrophe. A total and terrifying annihilation. A darkness so complete it reads as theatrical. Most people do not experience it this way. Most people experience it as a particular quality of silence. A drying up, a flatness that's not depression. It does not carry the weight of sadness or hopelessness, but a kind of colorlessness. The things that previously produced meaning no longer produce it. The practices that previously connected you to something larger seem to connect to nothing. And underneath the flatness, almost imperceptible, something is moving. Something is being reorganized at a level that does not announce itself to consciousness. Teresa described this as the soul moving through an interior night. The absence of felt consolation is not evidence that the process has stopped. It is evidence that the process has gone deeper than feeling can track. Imagine a seed in winter soil. No visible growth, no warmth, no external evidence that anything is alive beneath the surface. The seed is not failing. It's in a phase that does not produce visible evidence of its activity. The demand for visible evidence, the insistence on felt progress, felt connection, felt meaning is the most likely to cause premature excavation. The silence is not the problem. The silence is the signature of the work at this depth. What happens when you interrupt the Nigredo? The alchemists were precise about this. The opus interruptus, the premature extraction of the material before the blackening was complete, produced what they called a false gold, a substance that had the appearance of the final product without the substance, shiny, convincing, hollow. We have a contemporary name for this: spiritual bypass. The use of spiritual frameworks, practices, or communities to insulate the self from a dissolution that's already underway. The person who meets Nigredo discovers a new teacher, a new technique, a new community, and finds that their sense of meaning and connection immediately returns. This feels like progress. It is, in almost every case, the alchemical interruption. This isn't mystical speculation. Psychologist John Wellwood, who coined the term spiritual bypassing, and therapist Robert Augustus Masters both documented its clinical presentation in detail, the way genuine spiritual experience can be used to shield the ego from precisely the work that experience was initiating. The cost is not permanent. The Nigredo resumes, it always resumes, but time has been lost, and more significantly, a pattern has been reinforced. The pattern of reaching for relief at the precise moment the work requires endurance. This is what Jung meant by the most dangerous phase. Not because the darkness itself is dangerous, because the darkness is the exact moment at which the seeker is most likely to choose comfort over completion. There is a phrase that changes the entire frame of this experience. It's not consolation, it's a precision instrument. Completed, not healed. Healing implies that something was damaged and has to be repaired. It implies a return to a prior state. It implies that the goal is restoration, the recovery of what existed before the Nigredo began. But you cannot return to what you were before you saw what you saw. The breakthrough that initiated this dissolution was not accidental. It was the prima materia making contact with a level of the psyche it had not previously touched. The Nigredo is not the wound, it's the structural consequence of that contact. The old form must dissolve because it cannot contain what has been glimpsed. A new form must emerge, not improved, not repaired, but organized at a different level of coherence. Teresa's soul, emerging from the dark night of the spirit, did not return to the earlier mansions. It entered the central chamber, the state she called the spiritual marriage, with the quality of presence that was impossible before the stripping. Not because she had gained something, because she had been relieved of something that was standing in the way. Jung's patient, successfully through the Nigredo, did not recover their prior personality. They completed a process of individuation, the emergence of a self that was not constructed by the ego, but uncovered beneath it. The silence after the breakthrough is not absence, it's the sound of a structure being unmade. And structures are only unmade when something more essential needs the space. The question is not when this will end, The question is, what ends with it? If this resonated with you, come find me at luminaryflow.com. There's a free gift waiting for you there, and you'll also receive my newsletter with thoughts and inspiration behind each video. You'll find the link in the top comment below.